Welcome to this special show. The budget has been announced, but it's now time perhaps to try and understand the philosophy behind the budget and also do a deep dive into a couple of the more interesting and important announcements that were made during the budget. And who better to join us to discuss some of that than Dr. T.V. Somanathan, the Finance Secretary, also of course the Expenditure Secretary, and we have with us Mr. Tuhinkant Pandey, Secretary of the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, or DIPA. So if I can just start with you. The broad philosophy and the priorities were laid out in the 9 main areas. But is it correct to say that it's also a reflection of what even perhaps politically in other ways may have come across, the need to put emphasis on employment generation, in making sure that there's more inclusive growth in all parts of the country? Would that be some of the major priority areas for you?
I mean, I wouldn't be able to speak to the, what was the political reasoning, or I think there is a very strong economic reasoning which has underpinned what has been done. I think the reasoning is entirely economic as far as I know. And which is that
good politics would be good, really good economics also.
That is sometimes the case. Sometimes good economics is good politics, sometimes not. So in this case, I think this was driven by the desire to promote employment across the economy, make up for the skills deficit, bridge the deficit between the fact that companies want to hire people. There are many sectors where they have skill shortages, where they have shortages of people, and there are people who want jobs. But the connection between the two through the appropriate skilling has not necessarily happened. This is an attempt to provide fiscal incentives whereby companies take the trouble to hire first-timers, which has a cost to it, and the government will subsidize that cost, and perhaps to exercise a little bit of exercise themselves in providing skilling and then recruiting people. Again, we'll provide a subsidy. So it is a fiscal incentive to promote the right thing, and I think it will help in making people more employable and thereby addressing both industry's skill shortage and young people's aspirations for productive employment.
The need to put a focus on this also was underlined by the economic survey, saying that in some areas like services, for example, there could be a further storm coming with AI and other things. So therefore, we need to address this. There was talk in this about apprenticeship and getting people in first-time jobs, apprenticeship in the top 500 companies. Is it something that is going to be extended? Because that's the way you'll really be able to push numbers.
So that the word, I mean, apprenticeship in its common sense term is correct, but there is a legal connotation, so I would prefer to use the word internship. We have an apprenticeship act which has certain legal requirements, and in an apprenticeship, the majority of the money comes from the company.
Yeah.
In this case, the government will actually pay the lion's share of the costs in the case of this internship. We have identified that the top 500 companies account for a very large share of the total CSR expenditure in the country. And this is expenditure they have to incur on something other than their own business. So if companies are willing to spend a part of that on skilling through this scheme, we actually foresee a win-win-win in terms of it's good for the companies, it's a good CSR activity for them. They have to spend it on something anyway. And instead of spending on something which is totally unrelated to industry and work, building a clinic or a school or something, they can actually focus on something that has some connection with the economy. Secondly, it means that these are big companies who have reputations to protect. We expect them to take the trouble to provide a good skilling environment to their intern, rather than something that is just a superficial, pretense at internship. And lastly, this will enable people who don't have access to such companies in the ordinary way. We are not talking about the people who come out of IIMs, IITs, etc. These are people for whom accessing these companies may be impossible. So we are seeking to put them in to contact with these companies, open their eyes to a whole new world of work, and then build that connect between them. It's not that this company will employ them, they probably won't. It is that they acquire the skill and then become employable.
And they get the experience, their interns, now others will be willing to hire them. So Pandey, you've been at pains to say for the last couple of years that DIPAM and the way we should be looking at private public sector companies is not just from the point of view of disinvestment revenue, but the overall impact that they're making on government finances through dividends and other such measures, potentially also in employment through some of the things that the Finance Secretary was just speaking about. Is that still the way you're approaching it? Because public sector companies have had a great run in the recent years.
I think it's very much so. I think that is one of the reasons that our strategy is paying off. Because I think for far too long we really thought that disinvestment is the only budget line that we should be bothered about. Actually, we didn't know that there is a dividend there itself, which is an important thing. It's like saying that you can earn the income now, or you want to dispose of the property. You can you can get the rentals, or you just want to do the disposal of property. Now the CPSCs, they play an important role in the economy. In fact, increasingly many of the CPSCs are playing an important role in green transition, for example. Many of the energy companies in renewable energies and so on, in technology, railways, defense. There are plenty of those companies, those creating assets, doing capex. They participate. Together they do about 3 lakh crore of assets apart from the government resources. They put the capex there. So the disinvestment itself is a continuum. We, from 100% ownership, we bring certain amount of, we do the listing. The listing itself hugely benefits this enterprise because of efficiency, the way the transparency improves and so on. The management incentives are getting aligned with, market performance. Right. So minority shareholders have to be looked after also by the government, which is a majority shareholder. So if you really look at the overall strategy, we can actually maximize if we have a right time horizon, right time opportunity, but the focus should be on value creation irrespective of ownership.
Right. So when you're looking at the reaction that has happened from the budget, you may be somewhat bemused at the amount of attention that capital gains tax has actually got. Or were you expecting it?
We know that tax changes always attract attention, especially from markets.
In this case, it was partly in listed equity. It went up from 10 to 12.5%,
yes,
also along with STT. But a lot of the attention also came in other areas. Now,
yes.
For unlisted, it's good. You brought parity for unlisted equity with listed equity, which startups have been asking for a long time. But property, a lot of people are concerned at what happens to indexation.
So indexation will not be there, but the rate has come down. So you see, the rate comes down from 20% to 12.5%. That's a substantial rate cut. So we have done the calculations. I give you a hypothetical, number. If you look at, let's say if you think that the rate of return on property is 15% per annum, which is reasonable because people invest in property because it gives you good returns. If it's 15% per annum and you have indexation, let's say the indexation, we have checked the average. The average is 4.6% is the growth in the cost inflation index. Let's round it to 4 or 5, whatever you like. So let's say 15% minus 5 is what you are going to pay capital gains tax on in the existing regime, the old regime. 15 minus 5 is 10, 20% of 10 is 2. You pay 2 rupees. In the new regime, you will pay 12.5% of 15, which is 1.87, which is lower than 2. So your tax is, in most scenarios, we have worked out that for probably 95% plus of people, this will actually be lower than it was in the 20%, because indexation is about 4 to 5%, whereas property grows at 10 to 15%.
So one of the areas which I think some clarification may be merited is, people are worried about, if my father had bought a property in 1960, great-grandfather had bought it in 1920.
That doesn't change. The existing provision is, actually the existing provision is that you take the value as of 2001 as the base. You re-rate it to 2001, even if it's 1920, 1940, 1960.
And that will continue.
That will continue. That doesn't change. Only the gains post 2001 will now be taxed at 12.5%.
A lot of people have been...
And that's where I'm saying that having calculated the rates over the past 20 years, it is our very serious, conscious calculation that most people will actually be better off at 12.5% without than with 20% with.
A lot of people have also been looking and hoping and expecting that we're going to see this simplification, ease of compliance, ease of payment, all of that in taxes. Maybe a overall relook at the entire thing and simplification. A clear hint in this budget that we're looking at the entire direct tax code, and 6 months, roughly when the next budget.
It's not just a hint. It's a statement that we will do it.
So is that a clear statement that February, that when the next budget comes...
No, it doesn't say, it says 6 months. Now the timing, remember, this is not the same as the finance bill. So what legislative processes will be involved, I can't comment on, but there's a very clear statement about it.
6 months, yes. So it sort of seems to dovetail with the next budget.
I am announcing, it's not a hint, I am announcing a comprehensive review of the purpose is to, this will reduce, thereby providing tax, it will bring down, it is proposed to be completed in 6 months. It's much more than a hint. What I'm saying is a very serious endeavor.
So I'm just saying that we can hope that perhaps
Yes,
in
yes,
time for
yes,
the next
yes.
budget we might actually see
It's possible.
a
It's
sweeping
possible. Yes,
amount
yes,
of changes. Also, clear indications seem to be coming increasingly from the government that we want to unleash animal spirits. We want private sector investments to start picking up. We've done some of the heavy lifting. Private sector sometimes again that does tie in with that have ease of business, all of that. Is that something else that the government is committed to?
Certainly. That is the case. And in fact, one of the tax changes, the angel tax, is precisely for that reason. It's not that there was no rationale for an angel tax, but the balance between catching people doing wrong things and scaring people who are not doing a wrong thing. We thought that balance was getting disturbed, and that we were scaring too many good people in the guise of, or in the aim to catch bad people. So we've simplified that.
Shield the innocent while trying to punish the guilty, in other words, is what you're saying. Just wanted to ask you that looking at the public sector units, who've had, as I said, they've had a spectacular run. Defense PSUs, obviously, banks, many of them, in the energy sector, you can name them. What is your vision going forward? They seem to now be being the temples of the Indian economy in many ways. You see that continuing, and would the government like to maintain control in them or cede control at some point?
I think fundamentally, we, our strategy on that is, 5 pillars. The first one we are seeing performance, because unless and until you have fundamental performance, anything will be simply a wish thing, because we have to really see, you have to perform. The second one is the growth. You can't really be maintaining at level. If India is growing, they should also be part-time. So therefore, they must get into technology, they must get into the capex, they must get into that. That's where, the capital gains will come from, and if you don't have growing companies, the investors will not be benefited. The third, we are saying that, it's a profitable growth, which means that, you have dividends, you have profits, and you have a consistent dividend policy. So therefore, it's not merely to do that. While you roll back your profits into your growth, but at the same time, you also have a consistent dividend policy, and that's not a maximum dividend policy. In fact, we are not doing maximization of dividend, appropriate, consistent dividend policy. And then we are saying, we are supplementing it with right management incentives, which will really make that happen. Because if you don't have incentives which are aligned to that, and finally, we said calibrated disinvestment strategy. So, in the process of doing it, we must also expand the wider polling. And now, this particular thing is a continuum. Right. I think in the times to come, from time to time, depending upon opportunity, we do release stocks, but then we do not release in a manner where it will impact the minority shareholders.
All right. So one last question. Perhaps this is a lucky time when there's a little bit more fiscal space than is often the case. There's been a very good dividend from the RBI. You're starting on that path of fiscal consolidation, is continuing 4.9 in the fiscal deficit. Is there a time when some of those tricky problems that perhaps still need to be solved? We've built a lot of infrastructure, we've done a lot of things right. Agriculture, some of the other areas where work still needs to be done. Is this the time when you're going to be paying more and more attention to that?
Agriculture, we will certainly be paying more attention to, and there's one particular mention in the budget, a paragraph in the budget speech, which I think is of very great importance, which is a new approach to agricultural research. We think that agricultural research offers the best way of rekindling growth in agriculture. It's been growing decently, but we need more incomes in agriculture, and that needs better varieties, better cropping practices, etc. Too much of the research in the past has been focused on traditional crops like rice and wheat, where we have surpluses. We, on the other hand, are not self-sufficient in pulses, oil seeds, etc. And we also don't necessarily have varieties that are resistant to climate change. So we need a reorientation of agricultural research. And so there is a mention here about a new approach to agricultural research, which will be supervised by agricultural experts, both from within and without the government. And together we craft a new agriculture research strategy, which will also be funded. And that, I think, has a lot of promise for the future.
Right. And just before you go, any thoughts on the next generation reforms that were alluded to in this budget, but anything else that you can hint to which might be in the pipeline?
I can't be specific. I mean, some of the hints have been given in terms of how to better use technology, give a fillip to innovation, the Anusandhan Research Fund, the modular nuclear reactors. These are all indicators of the possible things that we would be looking at, which would come out in an economic framework, policy framework document that has also been proposed there. So you'll get the details when that document comes out.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Pandey, Dr. Somanathan. Thank you so much for joining us.